Well, Shabbat Shalom. I want to welcome everyone to the Sabbath Day conference call. This is Barbara serving as your host today, and Brother Pete is here as your co-host.
I'm so glad to be a part of this, and I'm glad that those who have joined in to hear this important material.
Why were the gates of Jerusalem shut at dark? Does this verse in Nehemiah 13:19 give support to sunset for a day's length? Here's the question. The evidence for the day beginning at dawn is compelling. However, what do you do with this text? This is what everybody asks, Nehemiah 13:19. And here is the text, Brother Pete.
And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened until after the Shabbat. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Shabbat day.
So does this text prove, in fact, that their Sabbath was starting at sunset? Well, here's the answer. A quick surface reading would seem to indicate that this text does prove a day begins at sunset. However, what is the context? When we read in context, this passage of Nehemiah actually supports a day and the Sabbath beginning at dawn. In this story, we learn that Nehemiah had returned to the service of King Artaxerxes back in Babylon. And here is the story in Nehemiah 13:6.
But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem, for in the 2 and 13th year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king. And when Nehemiah received permission from the king to return to Jerusalem, he was horrified to learn of all the evils that had been permitted to take root in his absence.
Okay. Oh, and here's the rest of the story, verse 7.
And I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil that Elishibib did for Tobiah in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of Yahweh. And it grieved me sore, therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber, and then I commanded that they cleanse the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of Yahweh, with the meat offering and the frankincense. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field. And then contended I with the rulers and said, Why is the house of Yahweh forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place.
One of the evils which Nehemiah quickly observed was that of Sabbath breaking. That was in verse 15. And verse 16 specifically states that men of Tyre brought fish and all manner of ware into Jerusalem and sold them on the Sabbath day. Verse 15, in those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and ladling asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. So the Israelites had paid a very high price for rebelling against Yah. 70 years captivity in Babylon. Nehemiah was understandably outraged that such a practice would be so quickly established again. In verse 17 and 18, he vehemently reminds the nobles of Judah that it was for such sins that Yah allowed the Israelites to be taken into captivity in the first place.
Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus? And did not our Elohim bring all this evil upon us, and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. Nehemiah 13:17-18.
So the text in question, verse 19, back to the beginning where we started, verse 19 immediately follows and reveals Nehemiah's plan of action. Close the gates of Jerusalem the night before so that none of those merchants could come in during the night or set up stalls and sell on the Sabbath. Notice that this verse is not saying that the Sabbath started at sunset. It refers to the period of darkness, which falls after sunset, as coming before the Sabbath. As the darkness was beginning to gather, so clearly this was after sunset, Nehemiah commanded them to shut the gates.
19, and it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day.
So Nehemiah was guarding the edges of the Sabbath. The Sabbath did not start until dawn, but he did not want to come out to the marketplace at dawn and find the merchants all set up and ready to sell. As a holy man of Yah, if Nehemiah had wanted to guard the edges of a Sabbath that started at sunset, he would not have been closing the gates at or just after sunset. He would have closed them earlier and been home to welcome the Sabbath with evening worship. So Nehemiah took active measures to plan ahead and guard the Sabbath on the next day. He did not want to get into a fight on the Sabbath, trying to cast out of Jerusalem the next morning when the Sabbath had started. So therefore, he took the precaution of closing the gates as it began to get dark. And again, it gets dark after sunset. So he did this so that the merchants could not come in during the night or in the early hours after midnight, as we would say it. And this is so that the merchants would not be in place to sell by the time the Sabbath arrived at dawn. So verse 16 specifically refers to fish being sold. Fishermen fished at night and brought the fresh fish to the market just before dawn while it was yet dark. So that's when they would have brought their catch. And there's verse 16.
And there dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath until the children of Judah, and unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Nehemiah 13:16.
Well, anyone who was there at sunset or before could obviously come into the city. What Nehemiah was preventing was nighttime, just before dawn, entrance by the merchants and fishermen. Verse 20 reveals that the merchants were persistent and camped outside the walls of the city a couple of times, expecting the gates to open at dawn and planning to come in as soon as the gates opened. Well, Nehemiah had given orders that the gates were to remain closed all through the Sabbath. He now told the merchants that if they came and hovered about again, he would have them arrested. And the result was that from that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath.
Verse 20, so the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Nehemiah 13:20.
So the Jewish Encyclopedia states every day begins with sunrise and ends with sunset. And that's a big surprise to us because we were following the Jews, weren't we, when we were beginning the Sabbath at sunset. But Jewish Encyclopedia says every day begins with sunrise, dawn, and twilight. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. In order to fix the beginning and ending of the Sabbath day and festivals, and to determine the precise hour for certain religious observances, it becomes necessary to know the exact times of the rising and setting of the sun. According to the strict interpretation of the Mosaic Law, every day begins with sunrise and ends with sunset. And that's in the Ezra commentary. So this confirms the opinion of our Jose that twilight is like the twinkling of the eye, and that is to say, with sunset, day immediately changes to night. So does the Sabbath begin at sunset or at dawn? And this is just one of the videos that we have done. So to study more out about Day of Atonement beginning in the evening and what Nehemiah said about the evening, those are the main verses people use to want to say that a day begins at night. But actually, Scripture says the day begins at dawn. So go to our website for more information, LunarSabbathDay.com. And I want to thank you all for being here today.